Dark Souls 2 is easily the most controversial game in the Souls series, and it really is a battle of two extremes. The people either love this game and it's their favourite in the series, or on the flip side, people hate it and think it's one of the worst games that have ever been made. Now, I have always been on the latter. I've always disliked this game, and to this day I do believe it's comfortably the weakest in the series, and I don't think that can even be argued. However, when I replayed it for this video, I do have some new thoughts and opinions to share. So to my understanding, Dark Souls 2 had a very troubling development. Now, Miyazaki wasn't the director on DS2, as he was primarily working on Bloodborne at the same time. So DS2 was left to two directors, Shibuya and Yui Tanimura. Now, midway through development, Shibuya left after apparent differences in vision for the game with Tanimura, so it was up to him to salvage what he could in the time that was left, which wasn't a lot evidently. So with that alone, it already makes more sense as to why the game is not to the high standard FromSoft set before and after its release. Now, it is easy to just say the B team were left with this and the superiors were working on Bloodborne, which is still argued among the fanbase as the best game in the series, and I do believe that there is some truth in it. No matter what happened in development, I believe even if everything went fine, it would still be lesser in quality than Bloodborne, as not only Miyazaki, but a lot of the lead programmers and other parts of the FromSoft team worked on Bloodborne, but not DS2. But however, it definitely wouldn't be as bad as what we did get. There are genuinely good ideas and innovations that were missed in later titles, but unfortunately the bad outweighed the good quite drastically, so instead the focus is on DS2's shortcomings instead. Dark Souls 2, in a phrase, is quantity over quality. The game is massive, which is normally said as praise, but definitely not here. There are a total of 41 bosses, including the DLC, and I could count on both hands, with fingers to spare, how many are good or higher. There are plenty that are decent, bosses like the Rotten, Flexile Sentry, etc. However, even these ones that are nothing offensive have no value. You beat them and it was a fine time, but they are nothing special or memorable. You kill them and then you move on, forgetting them mere moments later. But then you have the bottom of the barrel, the sewers of boss design, which I unfortunately do not have enough fingers to count how many are down there. This tier is reserved for the likes of the Royal Rat Authority, the Royal Rat Vanguard, Prowling Magus and Congregation, Skeleton Lords, etc., who are just a clump of mobs all put in a room and given a health bar. All the bosses I named go in a top 10 worst bosses in the series, and it's not even close. The boss quality is not at a good standard in Dark Souls 2, and with 32 in the base game, that is really underwhelming. Thankfully, the DLC does improve a lot in pretty much all aspects of the game, but that will have its own section later. This game has a weird obsession with trying to kill the player. Miyazaki has stated multiple times that these games are not made to be difficult, but the challenge does add to the experience. But that seems to go out the window here. Pretty much every room you go into, every corner you turn, be prepared for 3 enemies to jump out at you at the same time, then another one behind, and probably an archer or 2 as well. You are constantly swarmed with enemies, and I feel it's to make up for the engagements. They weren't hard or interesting enough, so they copy and paste some enemies, and there you go, a challenging encounter. And it's not just the fact there's multiple enemies. Most of the time they will ambush you and surround you, forcing you to take on multiple at a time, which these games never do well at. And for me, that's the most frustrating part of this game. Most of my deaths feel unfair, which negatively impacts my enjoyment of the game. And good luck trying to get through this game without a bow. No matter what build you're using, I'd suggest leveling up some decks to be able to wield one. Bows are incredibly overpowered in DS2, which on some level is a good thing, as I barely use them in any of the other games, and you have a good variety of arrows to focus on enemies' weaknesses. It's more the fact that it feels like an obligation to have one. Getting through most of the areas is a chore anyway, so having a bow to just stay at range is a good way to counter getting ambushed all the time. But places like the Shrine of Armana, I have no idea what you do without a bow. There are casters everywhere, more enemies hiding around every corner, and in the water, a bow feels absolutely necessary for this place. And of course we have to discuss ADP. I really don't know why this was even thought of as an idea and how it got through to the release. Basically, you level this stat and it increases the amount of iframes you have when rolling. So leveling this means when in the rolling animation you have more frames where you don't take damage. It also increases things like how fast you drink your Estus flask, increases poise and resistances, but they aren't as noticeable. But man, this is such a terrible addition. Even with 32 ADP and 105 agility, I still seem to be getting hit during my rolls which they have no right connecting with me. Doing a level 1 run on this game seems like torture, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And this is one of the main reasons for the hate the game gets, and justifiably so. Of course you need to be leveling it, and then it will get better and feel normal. However, that's why it's so confusing. You need to level a stat to get to the stage where every other game in the series is at naturally. It was a really stupid idea, and I'm very happy that it will never be seen again. Life gems are also a controversial topic in DS2. You have your Estus Flask, which works pretty much the same as DS1, however it heals quite a bit slower. But you also have life gems. You can buy them infinitely from vendors where you can use them and they give you health back over a longer period of time. The arguments have always been that they ruin what makes the Estus Flask so great, having to replenish them at bonfires, making the time between matter more as you can run out of healing, versus having pretty much an unlimited supply of healing, which is easy to get in this game due to the amount of souls available. I do agree that it does lessen the experience, however I also don't care all that much. Do they make it too easy? Absolutely, but to me they are almost required due to how cheesy the game is. I often find myself running out of my Estus anyway, since it's hard dealing with loads of enemies at the same time, so I just use a couple of my 99 stock and then I'm on my way. So I'm not far on either side of the debate, but I do understand both. And you do get an absolute overabundance of souls in this game. I can see both sides to the argument about if this is a good or bad thing, but man, I love it. You don't need to focus on a specific build. You can easily, without even farming, have loads of points and multiple stats, making many builds viable. And the build variety is great in DS2, easily the best part of the game for me. There are so many different weapons to use, heavy attacks that change up the combat, and of course the addition of power stancing was incredible. Being able to use two of the same weapon types and having new movesets was amazing and adds even more to the game's combat. The armor sets are really cool as well, and you can have some great fashion. You also get a ton of upgrade materials naturally through the game. In Bloodborne, for example, you only get one blood rock, which is used to fully upgrade a weapon, so you can only max out one. But in DS2, Titanite slabs drop for fun. Loads of enemies drop them on death, and you find multiple throughout the world anyway. Sure, it's great for trying builds, but it does seem a bit over the top. And there is a few little nitpicks I do have that are just annoying and damage the experience. Weapon durability has always been a useless mechanic in the Souls games. They barely mattered in DS1, Bloodborne, DS3, and have gotten rid of it entirely for Elden Ring. But Dark Souls 2 just had to mess it up. Your weapons break so fast and easily in this game, and there are quite a few enemies and like pots that have like this gas in them which breaks your armor and weapons as well. They replenish every time you sit at a bonfire, but some weapons literally don't even last that long. You have repair powder which can automatically repair a good amount of durability, but it's just a plaster on a large crack that has no reason for being there in the first place. Jumping also somehow has some issues. Sometimes when you jump you get what is now termed as a baby jump, where you for some reason don't jump as far as other times. I'm not sure if this may be a stamina thing or whatever else, but it seems inconsistent and I don't understand how or why it happens, but it sure does suck. Losing health when you die is really stupid. Your health bar gets slightly lower when you die, and it can keep going lower and lower the more you die unless you use a human effigy. I'm not sure why you would punish the player even more when they are clearly already struggling or they wouldn't be dying, so you make it even easier to die. It just seems silly. And I do want to talk about the Scholar of the First Sin edition. I played Scholar for this video, but I have played through Vanilla DS2 a few times as well. There are some differences, with enemy placement being the main one. I do prefer the Vanilla edition more, and it is more bearable with enemy encounters, but most of the problems are still here anyway. Before the initial release, Dark Souls 2 was made out to be a much bigger and more risk-taking game. It had a really cool cinematic trailer, and there seemed to be more of an emphasis on lighting. A lot of areas seemed to need torches to get through. You can see the aftermath in the actual game though, as there are plenty of torches and lots of areas that are slightly darker and can light up different sections of them, as well as torches can negate spiders and they won't attack you when you have one out. But that's really the depth of it. There's no real need to carry one ever. Nowhere is ever dark enough to need one. And even Elden Ring did a better job, with some caves being pitch black without a torch, making you have to use one to navigate it. So anyway, with the initial release being lackluster, the Scholar of the First Sin edition came out just over a year later and was dubbed as the definitive edition. You got all the DLCs included, which was good, but other than that, some enemy placement and item changes were all that was offered, and you had to pay for that. I don't know how much it cost on release, but if you're buying, for example, on PC today, it will cost you £30 or £20 if you already own the original game. And even getting the DLC included wasn't even completely a good thing, because in the vanilla version you get the access keys for them at the start of the game, but with Scholar you have to find them in the world. And don't get me wrong, the one in the gutter isn't too bad. You have to fight 2 annoying giants, but that's not the worst. And the Alien Lois is just a flower in a room at Drang Lake, but damn, I hate the Broom Tower key. Those lava frog things are so annoying, and you almost die dropping down anyway. Again, bows come to the rescue. So with Scholar, if anything, it made the game worse, yet this is dubbed as the best version of the game apparently. The DLC is widely regarded as the best content in the game, and it definitely is. There is 3 in total with 3 different themes, and they really are on a whole other level to the base game, although some problems are still lingering. You can tell the development team had a lot of time to work on the DLCs. They look great visually, and they have some really amazing level design, unlocking shortcuts through Shilva's temple, gaining new routes through Alien Lois after the snowstorm clears, and having multiple ways to go through the Broom Tower were really great and made exploring these levels fun. The boss quality is drastically increased as well. Almost every boss introduced is great and much more advanced than any in the base game. There are plenty of good bosses like Ava, Elena, and Sin, and then we have the best in the game like Sir Alone and Fume Knight. Burnt Ivory King should also be mentioned in the top tier, however getting swarmed with multiple knights in the first phase that seemed to only target you for some reason triggered some PTSD from the rest of the game. However, the king himself is great, and the arena and concept of you and your fellow knights dropping down into this huge fire chasm to kill the king is a great spectacle. However, as good as those bosses are, there are still some in the DLC that are more in line with the base game. You have the Gank Trio and Shilva, which are just complete garbage, just 3 NPCs chasing you at the same time. You have Blue Smelter Demon, which is just normal Smelter Demon, but with 2 times speed on certain attacks, and he's also blue now. And of course, we have Ludin Zalin, which is just Ava times 2. Very fitting for this game. And what do all these have in common? The worst runbacks in the entire series. To get to Gank Trail, you have to navigate through all these statues that shoot projectiles, plenty of poison knights and some big worms as well. Blue Smelters is just unnecessary, just huge clumps of enemies and so many archers and mages on top. There is no reason to even engage with them, you just have to run and pray to Jesus that you make it through in one piece. And of course, the worst thing probably in not only Souls history but gaming history, the frigid outskirts. I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy. The team at FromSoft who worked on this are truly despicable and evil people. You get spawned into a massive snowstorm that clears up every few minutes for like 15 seconds, and then when it comes back you are attacked out of nowhere by lightning reindeer things that do so much damage. So you're dealing with that constantly for 5 or more minutes until you can find the boss arena and get out there as soon as possible. And then you are greeted with the Ava clone, but now there's the 2 of them, which is the epitome of Dark Souls 2. It is a real shame as the DLC has some really interesting concepts and has the best bosses in the game, but then drops the ball so hard on the other aspects. However, I do want to end on a good note. The addition of items like the bonfire aesthetics, fragrant branches of yore, and Pharos lockstones were amazing and are missed in future titles. Bonfire aesthetics change the new game cycle for the area the bonfire is. This means you can respawn bosses, but it will be in New Game Plus and so on, meaning you can fight bosses or do areas multiple times in a different New Game cycle. This is also great as there are certain items like rings you can obtain by killing a boss in New Game Plus, and a very common way to play the game is instead of fighting the 4 lords and getting their souls, you can bypass that and get 1 million souls in total and get access to Drang Lake Castle. And you can do this by killing a boss, most likely the Rotten or Freya, around 4 times, and you can skip every other boss. Fragrant branches are used to bypass statues that are blocking certain areas. Sometimes it's just for something like a chest, or you can access a whole new area and get some new items or access to new NPCs. Pharos lockstones are good as well. They work similarly to the branches and open up secret areas, or can help in some levels by, for example, adding water into a poison area, so if you are poisoned you can just run into the water and it instantly clears it. So, with all that said, I do believe Dark Souls 2 is the worst this series has to offer. However, there are many reasons behind the scenes for this. I do not want to dislike this game, and I'm sure many others are in the same boat, but this is the product we paid for, regardless of what has happened before release, so players have every right to criticise it. DS2 has some great additions that were really missed in the later games, and I'm glad Elden Ring had brought back some through power stancing and the stone sword keys acting like fragrant branches, but overall Dark Souls 2 is really average at best. Is it the worst game of all time? No, nowhere close. But is it even a good game? Some people would argue that, but I would say no. The bosses as a whole are incredibly lackluster, the spam is frustrating, a lot of things in the world make no sense, gameplay feels clunky, and annoyances like ADP worsen the experience further. Dark Souls 2 did have potential that was sadly never close to being met, which is a damn shame. But that is my thoughts on Dark Souls 2. I would really love to see what you guys think on it. I'm sure there will be a lot of people who do enjoy it, so I would really enjoy seeing their perspective and getting a better understanding of their opinions as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. And if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot as well. But thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.